Hey everyone, my name is Elric. I'm here to teach you how to make kombucha. I've been making kombucha for a long time. My dad and stepmom were early on in the home brew movement, and they taught me how to brew kombucha when I was a teenager. I've been brewing it ever since, and the last couple years have turned it into a pretty significant hobby. In the last year, I actually started a kombucha company and was making 50 gallons a week or so, selling it to friends and family. And I eventually realized, once I started looking into taking it to the next level with commercial kitchen and everything, that it was going to take a lot more money and time and effort than I really wanted to put into it. So I decided to let it go. And I want to pass on the knowledge that I've gained, the professional grade skills that I have brewing kombucha. I want to pass that on to you. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be using today in our brew. We have a couple growlers to bottle the finished kombucha. You can use any bottle you want, really. We have a 2-gallon wide mouth glass brewing vessel. We have the ingredients to brew the kombucha, which is organic gunpowder green tea and organic sugar. We have a bath towel to go around the brewing vessel when it's brewing so that sunlight doesn't enter it. We've got a glass bowl to put the SCOBY in while we mix things. Terry towel to cover the kombucha while it's brewing, and a rubber band to secure it, and a strainer bag that we'll use to strain the tea as we pour it in, and a sponge that you want to keep dedicated to just kombucha and only use vinegar with it. Don't ever use soap with kombucha brewing. We're going to need a pot to brew the tea, and we're going to need some tongs or heat-resistant gloves to get all the liquid out of the tea after we strain it. We're going to need a wooden spoon, which I like to dedicate a wooden spoon to just kombucha to mix it, to stir it well. I use a heat gun to make sure that the final liquid is not too hot. You can use a thermometer. Generally with this method it's never too hot, so that's not a crucial item. We're going to need some measuring cups and mason jars, a pint and a quart jar, ideally with measuring lines, and then a funnel to pour the finished kombucha into the bottles. So that's kind of an overview of what we're working with today. And in a second I'll show you what the steps are. Alright, so let's get started. We're going to brew a gallon batch of kombucha today. I am harvesting a gallon that I've already brewed, and these SCOBYs are fresh. I grew them from scratch, started them about 2 months ago from GT's classic original kombucha, and they are looking great. They're doing really well. So the first step when you're harvesting, so this is kind of assuming that you've already got a batch going. There's another video for starting SCOBY from scratch. So your first step is to remove the towel from the top and fold it and set it aside with the rubber band. And you're going to make sure your hands are clean. So I usually wash them with soap and then rinse them really well, because you don't want soap residue. You want them to be like very, very clean. And you want to use your hands to take the SCOBY out of the jar and let the moisture drip down. Transfer it over to a glass bowl. And this can be not a bowl, it can be anything you want, but glass is ideal. Metal is not generally good for kombucha. And then you're going to want to take a pint of the finished kombucha out and pour it over the SCOBY. And that'll keep the SCOBY nice and moist. And the pint of kombucha is what you're going to use to kickstart the next batch. So then you'll just kind of keep your hands rinsed and clean. And I like to just keep everything rinsed and clean throughout the process. Make sure your towel is clean and available for use. And then it's good to cover that if possible. I'm going to just set it aside in a place that won't get dirty. Actually, let's see. I'm going to just set it up here. Alright, and then you're going to pour the finished kombucha. Oh, you know what? I forgot the first step. This is to boil your water so that the tea can be steeping, because that's the part that takes the longest. So back up. Sorry, I should have started this with the first step, which is to measure out 3 cups of water. Filtered is good. Spring is best. Tap water is not good for kombucha. And you're going to pour that into your pot and start that boiling on high. And if you cover it with a lid, it'll boil quicker, obviously. And then once that boils, we'll kind of monitor that, and we'll add the tea and let that steep for 20 minutes. So while that's going, that's when you'll pull the SCOBY out and put the kombucha, the pint of kombucha over the SCOBY, set that aside. And then we're going to pour the finished kombucha into another vessel. You can use any container here. And you just want to pour everything except for the very bottom, which has a lot of yeasty strands in it, which will kind of continue to grow more yeasty bits that are kind of undesirable. So we'll set that stuff aside. You can drink it. It's actually good for you, but you can also just dump it down the drain. And then we're going to give the jar a good wash without soap. And we're going to use the dedicated sponge and a little splash of vinegar, white vinegar. And we'll just give this a nice little wash with the vinegar, making sure to wash every part of the jar. And then rinse it 3 times. Now we've got a clean jar to start the next brew. And you can flavor the finished kombucha however you want. I have not juiced anything yet to flavor it with. I like fresh juice the best. I usually do ginger, turmeric, lemon, something like that. This time I think I'm going to do grapefruit, orange, lemon, because I've got a lot of citrus. But basically you would just add juice to this in this container, in whatever container you use to pour the finished kombucha into. And you just mix the juice in there, and then you're going to pour the finished kombucha into your bottles. And I think no, not boiling it. So just use a funnel to get the kombucha into the jars. and then you'll wash that jar with vinegar. And I like to bottle ferment the kombucha once it's bottled so that it gets a little carbonated and effervescent. So you'll just stick the caps on. And also, I like using those smaller pint jars to bottle my finished kombucha so that you can just grab one and take it with you on the go instead of lugging around these big growlers. But whatever you end up bottling the kombucha in, you're going to just set that aside at room temperature for 1 to 2 weeks, and it'll ferment even more and carbonate. But you can drink it right away. I often have leftovers if I make more juice to flavor it with, so I'll just pour a cup of it and drink it. It's delicious. It's just not as carbonated. Most kombucha companies end up just force carbonating with CO2. But yeah, so you'll set those aside at room temperature for 1 to 2 weeks, and then check your water. It's boiling, so I'll turn the stove off, and don't put the cap back on once you add the tea because you want it to cool down. So you'll add the tea. I've pre-measured it. It's a 1/4 cup for the 7-day batch. It's a little more if you're going to do a 10-day 6-quart batch. And you just pour that into the boiled water and make sure the heat is off, and you just let that sit for 20 minutes. And I always set a timer so that I don't have to think about it. And you can just easily set a timer for 20 minutes.
Okay, 20 minutes. Starting.
And then while that is steeping, we will get everything set up in the clean jar that we cleaned just now. And so you're going to measure out 3.5 quarts of filtered or spring water. Alright, so I've got my 3.5 quarts of filtered water in the jar. And next step is to add your sugar. So I've already measured out the sugar. You're going to do 1.3 cups for this size batch. And I usually weigh ingredients because it's a little more accurate, but it's just easier to measure. So if you have a kitchen scale, you can weigh it out. I've included all the weights, both weights and measurements, so you can do it either way. And then once you put the sugar in, you're going to put your strainer bag into the jar and secure the elastic on the outside. And that's going to be how the tea gets strained, because you don't want to end up with any tea in the mixture. Any particles that end up in the kombucha while it's brewing can create something for mold to grow on, and it can throw off the culture. So you want to make sure that only sugar and strained tea end up in there, and no particles of any type. And that's why you don't flavor kombucha until after you harvest it and take out the SCOBY, because even flavoring can throw off the SCOBY. So now we got to wait for the tea to finish steeping, which still has 15 minutes. So we'll just check back in 15. Alright, so the timer just went off and the tea is brewed. So now we're going to pour the tea, make sure the strainer bag is in the jar, pour it into the jar, and make sure your hands are clean. The tea leaves aren't too hot if you just touch them lightly, and make sure they all get in there. And then you're going to take the top out from the sides and use tongs or heat-resistant gloves. I mean, you can even use your hands if you've got tough hands. It's not crazy hot at this point. And you just want to get all the moisture out of those tea leaves. And then you're going to set that aside. And At this point, you're going to pour the kombucha that you had poured over the SCOBY, pour that into the jar, making sure that the SCOBY doesn't go in yet. And then you're going to stir it all very well with your dedicated wooden spoon. You want to make sure that all the sugar gets incorporated into the liquid and that there's no visible sugar, no visible solids. You want everything to be completely dissolved. You can also, it's an extra step, but it makes it easier for the sugar to dissolve. You can pour the tea, you can strain the tea into another pot or another vessel and then pour the sugar into that instead of pouring it into the cold water, because the sugar will pretty much instantly dissolve in the hot tea, and then you can just pour that sugar tea concentrate into the water. I often do it that way, but it's an extra step. It just depends what you prefer. So you just give it some good stirs, backwards and forwards, all around. And it appears that the sugar is completely dissolved. So I'm going to go ahead and set the spoon in the sink and make sure your hands once again are clean, no soap residue, and go ahead and grab the SCOBY and drop it in the mixture. And it should just float. If it sinks at all, you might have an issue, and you can always contact me with any questions you have, any issues you're experiencing. Pour any excess kombucha in there, and that is ready to go. I'm going to just rinse my hands really quick, and then we're going to cover it with a terry towel. I reused my terry towels for a month, and once a month I'll use a fresh one, but you can use a new one every time if you prefer. And you secure it with the rubber band around. Make sure there's no openings around the exterior, because even a small opening is a chance for fruit flies to get in, and they will mess everything up. So once you have that nice and covered, you're going to want to set this in a warm, dark place. In the winter, my bus is too cold, so I actually take it to my girlfriend's house and keep it in her bedroom, which is a little warmer. And what you want to do is, if it's not in a dark place, like say I was going to leave it here to brew, obviously it's in direct sunlight, so that's not a good thing. So what you're going to do, if there's any sunlight, is grab a bath towel and fold it lengthwise in half, and then just wrap it around the jar. And you want to make sure that the top isn't covered, because it needs to breathe, and the terry towel is thin enough that it can breathe, but if you have the bath towel doubled up on top, it's going to be harder for the kombucha to breathe. And then it's good to sit there for a week, and if you keep it around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll definitely be done in a week. If it's colder, it'll take longer, and the temperature affects the flavor profile when it's complete. A colder temperature creates more yeast, and a warmer temperature creates more bacteria. So having a nice temperature in the middle, around 70, 75, is going to make the most balanced kombucha. So what you can do is, if you don't have that temperature in your brewing space, you can put it in a closet and get a little temperature controlled heater that'll just go on. You can set a thermostat. You can even buy a thermostat that you plug any heater into, and it'll shut the heater off when it gets to the desired temperature, and just heat the closet or heat a room. You can also use pads from fish tanks, heating pads, and put those underneath. And you can get these cool little stickers that you can put on the brewing jar that'll tell you what the temperature is. So yeah, it's as easy as that. It takes about a half an hour total to brew your weekly kombucha. You can do a gallon batch, or you can even do a 6-quart batch. That takes a little longer to brew. It takes 10 days on average. But I mean, it's you have to do it less often, and it produces more kombucha. So I've included a 6-quart recipe in the recipe if I've sent that to you. And that's about it. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, elsbrico@gmail.com. It's spelled ELS as in Sam, BRICO @gmail.com. And I'm very happy to have shared my kombucha brewing skills with you. And I hope your kombucha turns out like the best you've ever had. Flavoring is always going to make it really tasty. And bottle fermenting it in the bottle at room temperature for a week or two is going to make it nice and effervescent. Plain kombucha is good too. Everyone has their taste preferences. So do what you like to do and live life in a good way. Thank you, and have a beautiful day. After a week of letting your kombucha brew in a nice warm 70 to 75 degree space without direct sunlight, you're going to want to check it and see if it's ready to be harvested. I usually harvest mine after a week, even if it's not 100% ready, because it can ferment more in the bottle at room temperature. And that way I just have a day every week that I know is the kombucha brewing day. But you want to make sure that it's ready and to your liking. So you'll just take the towel off the side and off the top, and you can just stick a clean pint jar into it and kind of just mix it, agitate it a little bit, and make sure that you're not just grabbing the top, because the top won't be an accurate representation of the whole as it's closer to the SCOBY. So once you kind of agitate it and mix it around a little bit, you can grab a little taste of it and just give it a little taste, see what you think. Tastes really good. I would say it's ready to harvest. Now if it's too sweet, then you're going to want to let it sit longer. If it's too sour, then it's gone too long. So you'll just have to fine-tune the time cycle based on your brewing conditions. It's always going to be different for everyone. If you have consistent temperature and a consistent space, then you can have consistent time intervals. So, like I said, I've gotten it to a point where a week is perfect, and any sweetness that's left is fine for me, and it gets evened out in the bottle when I bottle ferment it. So that's the final check to make sure that it's ready to harvest, and then you'll basically just start the process over. You'll take the SCOBY out, put it in a glass jar or a bowl, and take out a pint of the finished kombucha. Make sure your tea is getting brewed. Boil your water. First thing, I always start with boiling the water for the tea and brewing the tea, because that takes the longest. Setting your timer for 20 minutes, and then you'll flavor the kombucha. You can flavor it in the jar. I had told you to pour it into a separate container. If you flavor it in this jar, then you're going to want to clean it extra good with vinegar and your sponge. No soap, ever. So you can flavor it in here after you take the SCOBY out and the pint that you're going to use for the next batch. And then you'll bottle that up. You'll let those bottles sit for a week or two, or however long you want, however long you can wait. And then you'll clean the jar really well with the dedicated sponge and vinegar. And you'll pour the water, filtered water, spring water in there. And you'll add the sugar and the brewed tea through the strainer bag once that's brewed. And then you'll add the finished kombucha, stir it all really well, add in the SCOBY, put your towel back on there with the rubber band, and you're good to go for another week. It's a really quick, easy process once a week. It's a nice meditation. It's a good way to kind of have a strong relationship with your kombucha. And like I said, if you have any questions, hit me up with an email. All right, have a good one.